In this lecture, we'll continue with the figure drawing we began in the last lecture. We'll start by blocking in the side or lateral and the back or posterior views. The first step is to carry over the measures from the central figure. To get started, use your T-square. Line it up with the horizontals in the anterior view and transfer the heights to the posterior and lateral views at the same time. These should be light, thin construction lines. You could start with the 8 head measures. You could also add the number and note for each height, then carry over the remaining horizontal measures and any notes you think will be useful. On the posterior view, give yourself width measures like the ones you used in the anterior views. I suggested you vary these from the ones I initially gave you. You want to have measures that agree with your anterior view for width at the head, shoulders, bottom of the rib cage, top of the pelvis, and the crotch. Now you're ready to tackle the posterior view. You have height and width measures from the front view. In terms of shape, this will be similar to what you've already drawn. We'll more or less retrace the steps we took in the last lecture, starting with a simple figure without contrapposto. It will be good practice to play through these steps, and we'll add a couple new pieces to reflect the rear view. Start with a trapezoid for the upper torso, then another for the lower torso, the miniskirt shape, then the bikini bottom shape. Now, connecting lines between the upper and lower torsos, then the legs and feet, and erase the horizontal at the 4th head. Let's make some refinements to our basic shapes. We'll start with the upper torso at the shoulders. We'll draw 2 diagonals for the top of the trapezius muscle. This time we're seeing it from the rear, so it'll appear larger. That means longer diagonals than in the front. Then a subtle trapezoid for the neck, and erase what's overlapped by the traps. Then the head shape, and erase what's overlapped by the neck. Next, a couple curving lines for the shoulder muscles, the deltoids. Make sure they're overlapped by the trapezius. Next, we'll go to the butter glutes and add another 2 curving lines, cross contours, where the legs join the trunk of the body. And finally, we'll create planes in the feet. Start with 2 diagonals to define back and side planes, and a small triangle for the toes. Now we'll convert the figure stance to reflect contrapposto. Using your kneaded eraser, lighten the upper torso, also the lower torso and left leg. Now redraw the lower torso in contrapposto. Correlate the angle and height of the hip with the anterior view. Of course, the posterior view should be a mirror image, and do the same with the upper torso. Then add lines to connect the upper and lower torsos and to connect the lower torso to the right thigh. Now add a 3-sided trapezoid for the left thigh, then a trapezoid for the lower leg, and a slightly rounded trapezoid for the foot. Next, 2 intersecting diagonals for the heel, and a final one to clarify the planar structure of the foot. Now to the arms. Start with 2 trapezoids for the upper arms, 2 more for the lower arms, and 2 more for the hands. We can erase the portions of the upper arm that won't be seen, as well as the upper portion of the larger trapezoid representing the upper back. And then any of the non-contrapposto torso and leg you no longer need. Let's turn to the lateral view. It combines aspects of both the anterior and posterior views. I asked you to make modifications in the widths in your figure from the ones I initially gave in the last lecture, and you want to be consistent with those choices moving forward in the lateral view. But let's look at some general widths as a point of reference. The head seen laterally is wider than in the front view, about a full head height and width. The neck is about 1 anterior head width. The width at the shoulders is about 1 head height. This increases as the chest and spine protrude, front and back, and decreases as the spine curves in at the abdomen. The pelvis is again about 1 head height wide. The thigh at its widest point is less than a head, about 80% of one. At the knee, about half a head, swells at the calf and tapers at the ankle. And the foot is about 1 1/3 to 1 1/2 head. Seen laterally, the shapes of the body are also a bit different from the front view. So take out a sketch pad and let's rehearse this. The profile head can be thought of as fitting into a rectangle that's just about square, with a smaller internal square for the back of the skull, a rectangle for the front plane of the face, and a triangle for the jaw, and another for the nose. For the neck, a tilted rectangle. For the upper torso, we could use an elongated hexagon. For the lower torso, another tilted rectangle. For the upper leg, a tapering trapezoid. For the lower leg, another. For the foot, a wedge shape. We can use similar shapes to what we used in the anterior view for the arm and hand. Another common way to block in the shapes of the body is to use ovoids. Here we'd use a circle for the back of the skull and a vertical ovoid for the front, another for the neck, and for the upper and lower torso, and others of appropriate measure for the extremities. There's another factor we need to take into account, and that's angular alignment. The neck angles back, the upper torso forward, the pelvis back. So we get this zigzag motion. The legs, like the pelvis, also angle back, but less so. So give this a try. Draw a center line like this one. Let's start with the largest mass, the rib cage and upper torso. We'll draw a directional line. Then the elongated hexagon. Now another directional line for the pelvis and the angled rectangle. And a long directional line for the legs. Then the shapes for the leg and foot. Then a directional line for the neck, and draw the neck. Then the head. And make any adjustments as needed. Once you've got the idea, move back to the 3-view figure drawing. Follow the same steps starting with the rib cage, then the pelvis, and connect the two with a line in front and another in back. Then the leg and foot. In this view, we won't add a second leg and foot or the arms and hands. To finish up, add the neck and head. Stick to simple shapes, either rectilinear or ovoid. Keep it very simple for now, just block the figure in. Make sure that your widths agree with the body type in your 2 other views. As another check, let's look at some vertical alignments. These will of course differ by body type and stance, but I'd like you to be aware of alignments as a factor in your figure. In this anatomical model, the swell of the spine and butt line up along a vertical, far to one side. The back of the neck, the back of the knee, and the ankle line up too. Next, the top of the sternum and the knee. And the cheekbone lines up with the swell of the chest and the abdomen. Take this factor into account. Check to make sure your lateral view isn't tipping forward or back. People always have questions about drawing heads, hands, and feet. So let's start with the head. Individual heads, like individual bodies, vary in their proportions. They also vary in degree of symmetricality. But there are a couple formulas or canons that are widely used as starting points, especially when drawing from the imagination. And this kind of reference can be useful when drawing from observation too. It helps you see actual proportions in relation to a set of given measures. In the anterior view, we've used the proportion of 3:4 for the head's width to height. So draw a 3x4-inch rectangle for this view. Then vertical and horizontal center lines. Divide the horizontal into fifths. Then do the same with the lower vertical half. Next, draw an egg shape or ovoid into the rectangle. You can draw a 4 by 4 inch rectangle next to this for a lateral view, and then the interior shapes for this view. Let's start with the anterior view. The eyes ride the horizontal half, so place the irises on top of the center line, in the center of the second and fourth fifth. Draw the upper and lower lids of each eye to extend across each eye measure. Place the tip of the nose on the second fifth of the vertical. Center the lips at the third. Carry a vertical down from each eye's center. Let the length of the lips extend from about one to the other. For the eyebrow, take the eye's width. Measure one eye's width straight up from the lower lid. Make a mark and draw the eyebrow. Place the top of the ears above the top of the eyelid, but below the eyebrow. The bottom of the ears should be in line with the tip of the nose. The ears can extend beyond the rectangle. We'll make the nose one eye wide, wings included. And locate the top of the nasal bone, that's where the plane of the nose begins to project forward from the face, at about the top of the eyelid. To describe the planar structure of the head, we could add verticals at the temples. We could indicate that the jaw overlaps the ears the side plane of the head. Then draw the neck, indicating its overlap by the jaw. Then place a couple lines for the cheekbones. And perhaps a mark or two to create a front plane of the chin. Then any other refinements you'd like. Now, carry over your measures to draw the lateral view. Of course, this is all very generic. Many people have narrower heads or wider heads or noses or longer ears, but like with the figure, it gives you a template. You can play endless variations on it, just like nature herself. Also, when using these fairly flat linear systems, it's important to remind yourself that the head is three-dimensional. In the anterior position, the tip of the nose is closest to the viewer, the eyes farther away, and the ears at a distance behind. And the front plane of the head can exhibit curvature too. Hands have the rep of being difficult to draw, and there are good reasons why. First, they're complex. They have lots of movable parts, 4 fingers, each with 3 movable joints, a thumb with 2, over 25 bones and over 30 muscles. So the number of possible configurations of the hand compared to, say, the head, well, it's much larger. And unlike the head, rib cage, arms, or legs, the hand is much less symmetrical. Add to that all the different points of view we'll see the hand from, above, below, foreshortened, well, it adds up to a lot of visual complexity. To begin to make some sense of this, we'll start with measure and shape. As with the figure, actual hands may be thinner or stubbier or different in myriad ways, but this will get you started. We'll draw a view of the palm or plantar side of a left hand as if it's held up with the fingers slightly spread like this. It's easy to conceive of the hand in 3 parts. First, the large shape encompassing the palm or back of the hand minus the fingers, then a shape for the fingers, and others for the thumb. Start with a tilted rectangle for the palm, a bit taller than it's wide. Then a rough shape for the 4 fingers above it. A modified trapezoid like this one, wider on the right and a bit shorter than the rectangle below it. The upper shape's a little shorter than the bottom shape because the longest finger, the middle finger, is not usually as long as the palm. The fingers attach along a curve, not a straight line, with the pinky attaching at the lowest point on the right. So draw an arc from where the second finger will be. Rise above the dividing line at the middle finger and down below for the location of the pinky. The tops of the fingers follow an arc as well, so draw a second arc for the fingertips. Divide the top of the palm in 4 for the fingers. There'll be some web between them. The more the fingers spread, the larger this gets. Then draw 4 tapering shapes for the fingers. The pinky will fall partially outside the guide shape. The middle finger should be longest, the second and fourth fingers about the same, though the fourth is often a bit longer, and the pinky considerably shorter. Make any adjustments needed to their relative proportions and shapes. The 2 creases at the joints divide the fingers more or less into thirds along an arc, so we'll add these too. We'll approach the thumb in several pieces. First, a triangular shape. From the top of the palm on the left to a point out to the left at about 1/4 to 1/3 of the palm's height. This will approximate the base of the first joint of the thumb. Then a diagonal down into the rectangle. Following that diagonal, a curving blade-like shape for the thumb. It should register close to the top of the palm. The height of the thumb changes as it moves. As you pull it in towards the palm, it registers higher. Now a curving line from the base of the thumb to the palm. Now we'll round and edit the construction shape. The wrist is thinner than the hand itself, about 3 fingers wide, so we'll adjust on both the thumb and pinky sides. Next, we'll add some cross contours to the thumb. We can add others to the other fingers. The interior of the palm has 3 groups of pads and several prominent creases. We can use further cross contours to describe some of these forms. And we can include a cross contour at the wrist. Use what we've just drawn as a rough scaffolding and edit as needed. Look at your own hand and modify your drawing with the goal of making it more naturalistic based on what you observe. Try drawing a dorsal or back view of a hand using the same method. Here's an example from Dürer. He not only made hundreds of drawings of figure proportions, but, like Leonardo, assiduously worked out systems of measure for individual body parts. There are a couple things to note here. If you hold your hand laterally, you'll see that the creases where the fingers meet the palm are higher than the knuckle. This makes the fingers look longer from the back, and the body of the back of the hand can appear shorter than the palm side. Also note, the bases of the fingernails extend to about the halfway point of the top joint. Block out the large shapes first. Make sure the fingertips and joints conform to an arc, and use your own hand as a model. Analyze the distances and measure as you draw. Take a look at the inside of your hand. If you relax your hand, the inside's concave, bow-like. From the outside, convex, ball-like. The fingers naturally bend in toward the center of the palm. Once you've drawn the back, a good next step would be a concave and convex view. Then draw your hands in all the typical positions you find them. It's a very common assignment in figure drawing classes, and in fact you'll find scores of hand studies by many famous artists. This page is from the 19th century French artist Jean-François Millet. Like Millet, try a drawing of your hand holding a bowl, then a cup or a glass, holding a pen, texting. Then make a study of your hand turning on a faucet. It's great to look at your actual 3D hand when drawing, but photos can be useful too. Start with simple shape. A trapezoid, rectangle, or ovoid can often be used for the body of the hand. When it makes sense, an aggregate shape or shapes for the fingers. When an aggregate shape doesn't make sense, use an individual shape or shapes for one or more fingers. Next, block out the 3D structure using geometric solids. Each finger can be constructed using 3 hinge tapering solids, either blocks or cylinders. And then naturalize what you've drawn. In relating the hand to the figure, you can conceive of it as about 2/3 to 3/4 of a head in length. Let's take a look at the foot. The foot or footprint's a little over 1 head in length. Dürer also measured feet. Here we have 3 correlated views. In both the lateral and top view, he divides the foot into thirds. First, the toes. They conform to a rectangle that's 1/3 of the foot's height. Then the central wedge shape, and last the rear section containing the ankle and the heel. Feet are generally easy to deal with than hands. They're more unified in shape and volume. The toes are shorter and have a more limited range of motion than the fingers, so the foot can't morph into so many seemingly different forms. The problem in drawing feet relates to the fact that we see them most often in foreshortened views, like Dürer's heel view. Note how he deals with this. Instead of outlining, he moves from contour to cross contour, making sure the lines describing the closer parts of the foot overlap those behind. Let's follow Dürer's method here for a lateral and posterior view of the foot. Rule out a rectangle that's 1.5 by 6 inches and divide it into horizontal and vertical thirds. An inch or so to the right, lay out another rectangle 1.5 by 2 1/8. Add the horizontal thirds and the 2 vertical and 1 horizontal construction lines that Dürer adds for the heel. In the lateral view, give yourself a point where the Achilles tendon meets the top horizontal line and draw the tendon and heel. The negative shapes can help you gauge accuracy. Then 5 more points. The first where the top of the body of the foot meets your second vertical line. The second where the top edge of the foot traverses the second horizontal line. The third where it intersects the third vertical line. The fourth where it traverses the third horizontal. And the last where the top of the big toe intersects the final vertical. Using these points as guides, draw the top edge of the foot. Now for the toes. As Dürer has done, give yourself a vertical mark along the bottom horizontal for the tip of each of the small toes. Then position similar points of origin for the tops of the toes. Then draw the toes. For the posterior view, we'll start by drawing the Achilles tendon and heel. Then the ankles, inside higher, outside lower, and follow the remaining overlaps so the foot recedes in space. Let's also draw an anterior view. Here the foot's foreshortened. Start with a trapezoid for the body of the foot. The toes attach along a curve or diagonal, so we'll modify the first shape. The front of the toes follow a curve too. Now we'll add a volumetric front plane. Above will indicate the lower leg and ankles, the latter higher inside, lower outside. In a foreshortened view, cross contours and line overlaps are all but essential. We'll add a curve at the top to capture the planar quality of the foot, and we'll redraw both right and left sides using overlap. The tendon of the big toe often suggests a plane change in the body of the foot. We'll add a line that more or less corresponds with this. We'll divide the toe shape into thirds. The big toe gets the first third. The others will divide in 2 for the small toes. Next, we'll convert the 2 top plane smiling curves into individual frowning curves to capture the volume of the individual toes. Then work into each toe. The toenails are a great opportunity for more cross contours. With this beginning, the best way to proceed is to draw your own feet in many different positions. What we've been doing here with the figures, like retracing what we did in some of the first lectures as we started to tackle still life objects. Start with a center line, then place simple flat shapes in relation to measure. The next step we took was to turn the flat shapes into geometric volumes, and that's just what we'll do here. Robert Beverly Hale wrote, quote, "Beginners in figure drawing should spend a lot of time drawing simple geometric forms like the cube, sphere, cylinder, or ovoid form. When drawing the rib cage, the experienced artist doesn't start his drawing with a detail, such as the nipple or the navel, as a beginner usually does. Instead, he first visualizes the rib cage in the simplest form he can, a box. He's learned to visualize all complex forms in terms of very simple masses." Here's a preparatory drawing for A Last Supper by Luca Cambiaso that we've looked at several times before. His studies typify this approach. He's able to attend to everything in a similar way. Architectural elements, furniture and figures, everything's approached through measure, shape, and volume. His figures lack all the details that beginners can't resist starting with. No hair, no eyes, no noses, no lips. Yet the figures feel very real, three-dimensional. They have attitude, position, and sit in space. When he does get to detail like facial features, they'll sit securely on those planes because he's taken the time to understand the underlying architecture of the form. The other great benefit of this approach is that applying directional light becomes pretty obvious. Because we understand the form in terms of plane, it's clear which plane is facing the light and which away. So let's move into volume. But before we do, I think you'll find it useful to have a couple copies of your drawing to experiment with. You could either take a picture of your drawing and print it out at home, or go to a photocopy shop that has a large format printer, the kind used for architectural plans. They easily accommodate an 18 by 24 or even a 22 by 30 inch sheet of paper. In either case, print out on the light side so you can easily draw over and alter the image. Another option is to get some tracing paper and trace on top of your drawing. To add dimension to our figures, we'll use an approach that combines Cambiaso's rectilinear solids with elliptical cross-sections. This will help us define planes and capture the rounded quality of many of the figure's forms. If you've made copies, try this on one of the copies, or use tracing paper on top of your drawing. First off, we have to decide on our position relative to the figure. This will define what kinds of planes and ellipses we see. So let's imagine we're looking pretty much straight on and we're standing up. Our eye level will be about the same as the figure's. That means we're seeing most of the figure below eye level. You'll remember, at eye level, a circular cross-section appears as a straight line. Just above or below will begin to appear as an ellipse. At first, a slight one, but getting progressively fatter as we move farther away from eye level in either direction. Above eye level, the front of the ellipse appears as a frown, below as a smile. So let's start with the anterior view. First, we'll draw a light horizontal line for the figure's eye level, at about the vertical half of the head. Next, we'll create side planes in the head, then the neck, then the chest and abdomen. Now the pelvis, then the legs and feet, then the ankles, inside high, outside low, then a front plane for the toes, and last, the arms. We've now created planes in the figure. Next are the cross contours and cross sections. This will give us a real three-dimensional feel for the body. You'll want to manage your line weights in the cross sections, greater line weight on the surfaces than in the interior. This will help the form read convincingly. Let's start down at the ankles. Here we're far below eye level, so these should be fat cross sections. We'll draw a cross contour moving from the side of the leg to the front, then back to the other side. Now, with a lighter line weight, we'll move into the interior of the form. Then the other foot, same idea. Now we'll move to the top of the head. Here we're just above eye level, so the cross contour will appear as a slight frown. Now, just below the horizon, the top of the neck where it meets the back of the skull. Then the base of the neck. Then the top plane between the trapezius and the clavicles, an oval of sorts. Let's take a look at the connection of the arms and shoulders to the torso. It's useful to conceive of this as happening on a diagonal. You'll likely be able to feel this on your own body, just a bit in from the end of the clavicle, moving down between the pectoral muscle and the deltoid muscle. Let's draw a cross-section ellipse right here. Now, drawing through an ellipse at the bottom of the rib cage. We can adapt the ellipse slightly to capture a concavity at the spine, and another at the top of the pelvis. Remember, we're moving down away from eye level, so the ellipses should be getting a bit fatter as we progress. We'll approach the legs connecting to the lower torso similarly to the way we conceived of the arms attaching to the upper torso, diagonal ellipses. Down to the knees. Again, we can adapt the ellipses slightly to help capture what we know of the form. Then the feet. We'll add a slight curving top plane like a half cylinder. We'll go back up to the elbow and draw through here, then to the wrist. We'll divide the hand shape in half with an ellipse. That's about where the fingers protrude from the palm, and slightly curve the flat end of the shape to capture the quality of diverse finger lengths, and a shape or two for the thumbs. Take the same procedures and apply them to the posterior and lateral views. It's a good idea to try this a couple times on your copies before working into the original drawing. Once you've finished adding volume to your 3 views, print out some more copies. 5 or 10 would be ideal. We'll use them in the next lecture. Again, print them on the light side. The goal is to draw on top of them using the underlying structure you've created. Next, we'll see how we can make the figures we've drawn feel more naturalistic. We'll also discuss the skeletal system and the major muscles. Some anatomical knowledge will help you draw figures both from your imagination and from observation.